Well, that's a really good question. And we have to look at it at two levels. There is the messaging coming out of foreign capitals, and then there are the relationships, which are not always entirely transparent or well understood. I mean, the public perception of the conflict in Sudan is essentially that the key actors, the closest partners to either side, are Egypt to the Sudanese armed forces, and many would say the United Arab Emirates to Hemeti, together with Eritrea. Saudi Arabia is certainly messaging a more pro-SAF position, but in terms of financial relationships, both sides have got business interests and financial interests tied up with Saudi Arabia, which gives them the ability to engage with both, even if their public messaging is leaning towards one side. The United States is in a difficult position because the US has been calling for a return to civilian rule. Now, Congress in particular has been very critical of Burhan and of the military, and of course of Hemeti as well, partly because of his past as a leader of the Janjaweed militia. But the United States also has threatened sanctions on both sides, which could be an even-handed approach. There's been some suggestion that the United States is sequentially favoring Burhan. There are some analysts who are arguing from the US that sanctions should first be applied to the RSF and Hemeti because they are a non-statutory force. That is to say that the armed forces of Sudan are the legitimate army of Sudan, and that the RSF is an ad hoc force that was created to pacify the Janjaweed after the campaign in Darfur and to balance the power of the SAF while President al-Bashir was in power. The US would then have to threaten sanctions or apply them on the SAF to make sure that that they actually do lead a return to civilian rule.
هناك من سيجادلك حول هذه النقطة ويخبرك أن الجيش هو من قصف المدنيين والمستشفيات في هذا النزاع. لماذا لا يعاقب كذلك؟
Well, it's true. The army is the only force that has air assets. But in the early days of the conflict, the difference between these two forces is that the army is more heavily equipped. It has armor, it has artillery, it has air force, and therefore it has the destructive capacity in a sense that the RSF doesn't. What the RSF has, which is an advantage in some respects, is that it is light and mobile and fast. And so in the early days of the conflict, the RSF moved very quickly into Khartoum, so into areas populated by civilians, towards the center of Khartoum. And so RSF leaders and fighters have actually been quite open and public about this, stating that they can't afford to fight the SAF in rural areas where the SAF can bring armor and artillery and air assets to bear. They need to get into urban combat where tanks have little purpose. Aircraft, of course, ideally shouldn't be used because of the damage to civilian population. And they've said, we want the SAF to be courageous enough to face us inside Khartoum face to face. So in a sense, the RSF has deliberately drawn the SAF into urban combat, and the SAF is using its superior means with terrible destructive consequences.